Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special live stream of the Katie Halper Show. We are doing a special Sunday evening live stream, and the reason we are doing this is because, well, a couple reasons, but we wanted to make sure we are arming people with information about how to not get hassled by CBP. And also, I want to show CBP, if you're watching, that I'm here. So, what am I talking about? Okay, I am talking about Customs Border Patrol. I, along with Victor Coronado, who is here on the screen with us, we went to Cuba. It was an amazing trip. We went with Code Pink. We're going to talk about that more shortly. But as people probably know, I, along with other people, there were 20 of us, more or less. We got detained, questioned on our way back from Cuba. And I was really excited to be connected afterwards. Would have been great if we had spoken more before, but very excited to be connected to Moira Meltzer-Cohen, who is a lawyer and member of the National Lawyers Guild. And so what we wanted to do was make sure that people were empowered with information, because while it's important to highlight what happened to us on our way back, first of all, we're not the major story. What's happening in Cuba is the major story. But of course, this is the domestic repression arm of the same issue, right? So kind of like what we see with Palestine is we have the United States funding the genocide against Palestinians, and then they have their domestic arm, which is the repression of speech and the harassment of people and the weaponization of immigration. So there's a similar thing happening with Cuba. And the other thing that's really important is that while we want to show the overreach and the kind of abuses committed by the federal government, we also don't want people to feel powerless and people to feel scared of going to Cuba. And so we're encouraging people to keep going to Cuba, which is totally legal when you go on a humanitarian mission, which is what we did. You can also go as a journalist. So I'm thrilled to be talking to Victor and Moira. We're also going to be having on Nathan Robinson later, and Medea Benjamin, who herself is at another airport. So Victor, you and I are going to be talking throughout, but I want to, I guess, start off with Mo, because I wanted Mo to inform people about what their rights are. And Mo, would it be helpful for you if I kind of talk through, or Vic and I talk through what happened to us? Or do you want to just kind of give more general advice?
I would be happy to start and you can interrupt me. How's that?
Great. Perfect.
Okay. You said that you wanted to have this show to help people not get hassled by Customs and Border Patrol. And I don't know that that is on the table. I don't think there's any way for us to necessarily prevent you. I wish that I could prevent you from getting
less hassle.
We can't necessarily prevent you from being hassled. What we can do is prepare you and help you feel really confident about what your rights are. And I'm really glad that you made the point that you're not trying to frighten people or make people feel powerless or paralyzed. You're trying to make sure that people have all the information they need so that they're ready. If you do have an interaction with Border Patrol. And I think one of the things that's important to note is it's really hard to anticipate, right? Those interactions that people have with Border Patrol don't happen every time. You can't necessarily anticipate why they're happening. They're not, I want to be very clear, they're typically not happening because Border Patrol actually has any reason to believe that you have engaged in any unlawful activity, right? They're just kind of fishing. And so I think the most important things I would want to talk about today have to do with digital hygiene, right? Meaning what are the limits of Border Patrol's authority with respect to looking at or copying or seizing your electronics? And also, what are your rights with respect to what kinds of questions you actually are compelled to answer at the border? Because I want anyone who is crossing international borders to really understand the point at which they can say, I'm not comfortable answering that and I'm not going to. And
Right.
feel confident that there actually are not particularly serious consequences for refusing to answer questions, because you actually have no obligation to speak to law enforcement or answer their questions in general. And refusing to answer questions is not evidence that you've done something illegal. It's the exercise of your constitutionally protected rights.
So so I had heard that, and people were saying you just have to answer very basic questions. But then, and again, again, part of the reason I'm doing this is because I wish I had been more prepared, and that's something we're going to be working on moving forward. See, I thought that if I did that, they would just stop asking. So what happens? Let's say I say to them, it is my constitutional right to refuse to answer these questions. Can then they hold me, and how long can they hold me for?
Well, they can sort of stall and delay, but if you are a United States citizen, they can't deny you entry, and they can't arrest you unless they have probable cause that you have done something illegal. Refusing to answer questions is not illegal. So at the border, they're going to ask you, there are things that they can ask you. And they're going to ask you to look at your ID. They might ask what the purpose of your trip was, your itinerary, your destination, how long you stayed wherever you were. And those are fine questions, and you should answer those truthfully. And you should know that it is a crime to lie to a federal agent. So the safest thing is to just answer those kinds of basic questions truthfully, and to answer only the question that's asked. You don't have to give them any extra information. These questions are very much par for the course and shouldn't be alarming. But once you've answered those questions, they may start asking you things about your political beliefs, your religious beliefs, what kinds of people you wanted to see wherever you were traveling, what kinds of activities you engaged in. And those really are now intruding into First Amendment protected ideas, associations, and beliefs. And that's information to which the government simply is not entitled. And at that point, you can say, you know what, I'm just not comfortable answering these questions without my attorney, and I'm not going to answer any more questions. They might say any number of things. They might say, oh, you have to answer the questions. That's simply not true. And you can just keep saying, I'm going to wait. I'm not going to answer those questions without my attorney. They might say, do you think you have something to hide? No, the fact that you aren't comfortable answering questions without your attorney does not mean, that's not evidence that you've done anything wrong. You can just kind of keep saying, I'm not going to answer those questions in the absence of counsel. It doesn't mean they're going to bring your lawyer there. It doesn't mean they're going to let you talk on the phone to your lawyer. It means at a certain point, they can't just keep hanging on to you. They can't just kidnap you and keep you there and force you to answer questions. Right?
Right. Because I said, can I speak to my lawyer? And they said, you can speak to your lawyer later.
Right. It's not that saying I'm not going to answer questions without my lawyer will result in your lawyer being produced. It means that you are letting them know you're not going to answer those questions. And at some point, they really have to stop asking. Okay. Because they actually do not have the authority to hold you and to continue to interrogate you unless they have probable cause that you've done something illegal.
Right. So they asked me, for instance, if I bought rum, if I bought cigars. I didn't. They asked me about like who we met with. They also had me fill out a form, and they asked for like my parents' names, dates of birth, my college, my education. So were all those things required to fill in, or are those outside of the scope?
You're never obligated to answer those questions. It can be expedient to answer those questions, and those are not the kinds of questions that are likely to give them information they don't already have.
Right.
But really, my concern is once they start asking you, are you a communist? Are you now, or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? We start really getting into territory where there's no reason for you to answer those questions. There's nothing that they are going to learn from those that is a legitimate path of inquiry for them. Their job is to make sure you're not smuggling, live animals, plants, contraband from Cuba into the United States. Their job is not to have a conversation with you about your humanitarian commitments.
Okay. Right. Is there anything, Vic, that you wanted to ask Mo while Mo is here?
The question of the cell phones. Did you want to talk about the cell phones?
Yeah,
me
I'd
or
be
Mo?
very
Or
happy.
Mo?
Well, either of you. I
Okay.
I know most of us got our cell phones taken away, and that like you, Katie, I wasn't prepared for that, and so
Right.
maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So at the border, they can search your belongings, and they have, or they at least claim to have the authority to inspect, copy, or seize your electronics without a warrant. And that's a real departure from what we're used to in this country, which is that the Fourth Amendment protects us against warrantless seizures or warrantless searches and seizures, meaning, police officers can't just show up and come into our home without a warrant from a judge that says we think a federal offense has happened, or we think an offense has happened. And we're giving this limited authority to go into this place and look for particular things that we think would be evidence of that criminal offense. At the border, that gets a little mushier, and we're really looking at a situation where border agents routinely will be inspecting people's phones, asking them to unlock their phones, taking copies of the phones, and sometimes even seizing the phones. What I have been observing over the last while is that they will often say, if you unlock your phone and allow me to look at it, then I'll give your phone back. Well, people don't want to lose their phone. That's a huge expense and inconvenience.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times people really, that's very coercive. People feel like, well, okay, if I get my phone back, that's the most expedient thing to do. Sometimes you unlock your phone and they look at it and then they hand it back to you, but not always. It's not a foregone conclusion that you unlocking your phone and allowing them to look at it will lead to you getting your phone back, and then we go on our merry way. I think it's really important for people to understand, first of all, if you are traveling at the border, they may have the authority to take your phone and look at your phone and copy your phone, but you aren't compelled to travel with your phone.
Right.
And if you don't have your primary device with you, then you are going to circumvent the whole problem. Also,
And that's legal, right?
Of
Everyone's entitled to bring a
course.
phone that they don't regularly use.
Of course. To the extent that you have a device that is maybe a secondary device, the same kinds of digital hygiene principles should apply, right? It should not be unlockable with a fingerprint or biometrics or facial recognition. You want to have a strong alphanumeric passphrase. In the same way that you have no obligation to answer the questions of police officers or law enforcement, you don't have an obligation to answer questions about what your passphrase is. So if you have strong full disk encryption on your laptop and your phone, and you have a strong alphanumeric passphrase that's, at least 15 characters long, you don't have an obligation to unlock your phone for them. So even if they take your phone, they may or may not be able to access it, right? If you've taken care of it. You also want to make sure that, you aren't keeping important or sensitive documents, contacts, or messages on any device that you think might end up in the hands of the state. Again, not because you're trying to hide evidence of your crimes, right? Because I don't think anyone whose phone was taken is in danger of being criminally charged based on something that was found in their phone. The issue is not that we're worried that you're all going to get busted for your illegal behavior. The issue is that the government's going to take copies of your phone, and we don't know what they are going to think of as being evidence, right? We're not always talking about firearms and, you know, LSD. We're talking about, you know, who has whose contact in their phone. And, you know, everyone puts contacts in their phone now. They're not putting in John Smith, they're putting in John Palestine encampment, right? And so you're giving over a lot more information to the government than they're actually entitled to get, even if that information is about First Amendment protected beliefs, associations, and activities. There's all kinds of things that the government can then do to use that information to intrude into your communities and to make your communities less safe. I wouldn't assume.
Okay. But they also can, again, they can take your phones and try to open them. So the safest thing would be to just not bring that phone, or to wipe it. You know, like if I go to Cuba, again, just being transparent, and I didn't need my laptop in Cuba, right? But I went to Miami before Cuba, and I had to do my shows. So I needed a laptop. So what I'll do next time is I will bring my laptop, leave my laptop in Miami, and then go to Cuba, come back from Cuba, and then pick it up there. And I would bring a phone that's not my primary phone.
Right. I mean, again, this is a huge, I'm less concerned about people being criminally charged because of things that are found on their phone, and more concerned about things like social mapping. But for you all, this is a huge inconvenience and a huge expense. You know, when my clients have devices seized, they're almost never concerned about the information that's on those devices.
Yeah,
they're concerned about things like their art being stored on those devices. They're concerned about things like their schedules, right? All of these things that live on our devices now that we need in order to function. Their contacts, you know, their work contracts. And so, and it's both really onerous and potentially really prohibitively expensive to replace these devices. So the issue, you know, again, is not, oh, you shouldn't take your cell phone because you're hiding evidence of all your misdeeds. This can become really, really inconvenient for you. In addition to the fact that we don't need to do the state's job for them and hand them, you know, whatever kinds of information they might be looking for about who we organize with, right? So, you know, again, you are.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. You want to finish what you're saying? Then I'll ask my.
No, go ahead.
So let's say you had your device either confiscated or taken away and then given back to you. So they have the right to take it away and not keep it in front of you, right? They can take it away,
but you can
and then
ask for them. They have the right to search your belongings and to take your phone, but you can at least ask for them to search those things in front of you. That doesn't mean they're going to do it.
Sure.
But it's not the worst idea to ask.
Right. Okay. So now for people who have their phones taken, confiscated, or had them taken and given back, there's a possibility, of course, that they took screenshots, they gathered information. Then there's a possibility that they planted, you know, put malware or spyware on your phone. I know it's very small, but it is a possibility, right? So they could be seeing what's on your devices after. Now, you mentioned something that was kind of scary, which is that we know that they are trying to use attempts to, like, there's a court case, right, where they're trying to use.
There's one court case ongoing in Atlanta that has to do with somebody allegedly using like a distress password to wipe their phone at the airport when Border Patrol was attempting to look at it. And that case is in its early days. I think that it's in very good hands. Like the attorneys who are handling that case, I do trust to really litigate it vigorously. And I kind of look forward to seeing how it comes out, because it is an unusual sort of claim by the state that this person was destroying so-called evidence. Well, did they have any reason to think that there was evidence of any kind on that device? Right? You can't destroy evidence if it isn't evidence of something, right?
And don't you just have the right to get rid of stuff because you don't want, like, I mean, I could have an embarrassing photo, right? For all we know, like, don't I have the right to get rid of that, or just the right to not have the government snoop on me, even if it's all totally legal?
You have the right to delete your bad selfies at any time, right up until the government is sort of putting you on notice that they want to look in your phone. And so it is, if your device has been seized, I can't tell you enough, like, please, I know your impulse might be, I need to remote wipe my phone. First of all, it's not necessarily going to work. Okay. We don't, trying to remote wipe something does not necessarily mean that everything is going to actually be deleted and unrecoverable. But second of all, that's the point where it is going to start to look very sketchy. And, we don't want to put you in a position where you're then being accused by the state of having attempted to conceal or destroy evidence. So, obviously you want to disconnect or change your passwords. You don't want your messages to continue to go to that device because you need to function, right? You don't need to like leave that phone operational.
Right.
But don't try to destroy anything that's on that phone, because at that point, even if all you're destroying is pictures of your cats, the government doesn't necessarily know that and can start making allegations that you're trying to conceal evidence or destroy evidence.
Right. So that's actually why I want to have you on too, because I could see people totally, I mean, I don't have the tech wherewithal to do this. So, but I could see people totally like thinking to be safe, oh, I'm going to get rid of all the stuff on my phone remotely if they can do that. And I want to have you on to tell people not to, because I don't think, I mean, it's kind of absurd, but things can be absurd and they're still the law, right?
Yeah. Usually.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I want to be clear. If you go across a border and CBP says, we want you to unlock your phone, the safest thing to do is to decline. Because if you do unlock your phone for them, that might be considered consent to allowing them to look in your phone. Now, they might look in your phone anyway, but if you haven't consented to that happening, it leaves open arguments that your lawyer can make about anything that they do then find in your phone, right? So it really is best practice to, regardless of whether you have a primary or secondary device or no, a phone that's totally empty even. It's best practice to keep it off while you're going through, to have it full disk encrypted, to have a strong alphanumeric passphrase, and not to unlock it for them, because that's sort of the best evidence we have that you aren't in any manner consenting to that intrusion into your device. We also don't want to have a situation where you're attempting to remote wipe your device while CBP has it, because again, that might be interpreted as an effort to conceal evidence, even if there's nothing on that phone that is evidence of any kind of criminal offense.
Right.
We CBP will tell you, oh, you can get your phone back in a couple of days. I have never seen that happen. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but it would be unique in my experience to see somebody get their phone back from Border Patrol in a couple of days, or even a couple of weeks, or even a couple of months. There are things that we can do to try to get your devices returned. And I think it's worth trying to get your devices returned, especially as activists, to see if, a digital forensic person can go through and see what, if anything, actually was done to the phone while it was in the custody of the government. That's way beyond, my area of expertise. But I think it's important to try to find out. So trying to get your phone back isn't useless. I don't think it's a total fool's errand to try to get your phone back, although I would be circumspect about continuing to use it after I got it back. I think that it can be really interesting and useful to find out, what was done to your phone while you didn't have it. But I don't think that it's going to be a straightforward or streamlined process to have it returned.
One last thing for me. I remember learning from a friend. I think she clerked for this guy, for a judge who made this decision. I don't know if this is a New York law or federal, but you're allowed, at least in New York, to run away from a police officer who's chasing you.
Yes. You can't really run away from Border Patrol, but yes.
Right. No, I'm not bringing that up. Sorry, that's not my argument. But what I'm saying is I remember that was interesting because it was basically taking into account police brutality, police bias, right? Like institutionalized racism on the police force. So I would have thought that, I know in this case is happening right now, that you could say, well, given that there's government overreach and government abuse, of course, why would I not want to remote wipe my device? But again, you can think that things are reasonable, and that doesn't mean that they are going to be legal.
I mean, I think it makes sense. As a human being, I understand why so many people, their immediate impulse is that they want to wipe the contents of their phone because they don't trust that whatever is in their phone isn't going to be used for sinister purposes by the state. And I don't think that's an unreasonable concern, but I don't think it's a concern that would go very far toward justifying it if the government charged you with trying to conceal or destroy evidence.
Right. And how much worse is this now under Trump versus before? And how much is this a bipartisan phenomenon? And then last question, so easy. What can we do to stop this government overreach?
That was a lot of questions. Okay, the first question is it worse under Trump? I think I said this in the beginning. It's really erratic. When and whether someone gets stopped at the border. There are people who get stopped every single time. There are people who get stopped sometimes. There's not a good way to predict it. There are things that you could presumably do that would probably guarantee that you would be stopped at the border every single time. But there's nothing that I could tell you that would prevent you or that would help you avoid being detained and interrogated and having your devices looked at. So I don't think there's a way around that. And there's not a good way to reliably predict whether it's going to happen to you. Is it worse under Trump? Maybe. But I think that's probably more related to the individual officers who are now being hired and who are starting to understand the limits of what they can get away with, more than it has to do with any explicit policy. And certainly borders have been really unsafe for anyone who might be considered or perceived to be on the wrong side of that border, for, for decades, since maybe the entirety of this nation's colonial history. I certainly wouldn't say, oh, this is a Republican thing or a Trump thing. It may be more vicious, it may be more widespread, but it certainly, I think it would be foolish to think this is in any way new. It may be something that people who are not as used to being targeted in this way are only just now starting to experience personally. So I think that's probably a more accurate description of what's happening. Is there anything we can do to stop government overreach? I mean, not as individuals and not in the immediate short term. What we can do is not participate in it, right? We can decline to roll over and, comply with unreasonable requests. So that means doing things like having a secondary device that you travel with, making sure that you're thoughtful about the kinds of things you say on the internet and in your Signal chats, having strong encryption. Security is a set of processes, not a set of tools, right? And so really becoming conversant with good security practices, understanding that not all security is digital security, working to develop trust with the people that we organize with, and feeling courageous and confident in what our rights are and confident in our right to assert things like, no, I'm not going to unlock my phone for you. No, I'm not going to answer any more questions. Right. And taking the time to get really comfortable doing that. The last thing I'll say is, to the extent that anyone has an encounter like this at the border and then later has any kind of federal agents or any kind of law enforcement showing up at their home, remember, just as I said earlier, at the border, it's a crime to lie to a federal agent. It's a crime to lie to a federal agent at the border and anywhere else. Okay. So, the Fourth Amendment protects against having to allow law enforcement into your home without a warrant. So if law enforcement comes knocking at your door or calls you on the phone or comes to your work or goes to your mom's house and says, oh, we just want to see if you'll voluntarily speak to us, you can talk to them through the door. You don't have to let them in. Because it's a crime to lie to an agent, the safest thing to do is say as little as possible. And I would say the safest thing to say is, I'm represented by counsel, leave your name and number, and my lawyer will call you. And the reason you want to do that is that once they know you have a lawyer, they're supposed to inquire directly to your lawyer, right? As opposed to continuing to try to talk to you. And so your lawyer is then in a better position to call them up and say, hey, you're, inquiring about my client. What do you want to know? And get a sense of, is there actually a criminal investigation here, or are you just fishing? And can really act as a shield. And frankly, once agents are aware that there's a lawyer in the mix, it's much more difficult for them to do the thing they want to do, which is just have these sort of informal conversations where people consent to speaking to them voluntarily and end up giving them information, again, that isn't about crimes. It's not necessarily information about anything unlawful that has occurred, but it is information that they can then use, to say, oh, well, this guy says he organizes with Joe. Let's go to Joe's house now. Right. And so, just invoking your right to counsel and getting their name and number so that there is someone to call,
You mean the
Can
counsel's name and number, or the officer's name and number?
the officer's name and number.
Okay.
Saying, I have a lawyer, please leave me your name and number so my lawyer can call you,
Okay.
can help to limit the degree to which law enforcement's able to keep intruding into your community. It is really important to get their name and number. Because if you just call a lawyer and say some FBI agents showed up at my door, then there's not much the lawyer can do, right? I can't call the field office and say, hello, were you bothering my client? And they say, well, who's your client? And should we be bothering them? Right. So we really do need to get the contact information. But at that point, it's very helpful to have someone who can call over and find out what's going on, because 9 times out of 10, it really is just they are curious. They want to know if you'll talk to them. And if you won't talk to them, okay, thank you, goodbye, have a nice life. They close the file and move on.
Right. And now, does that mean everyone should have a lawyer in their phone? I mean, in other words, a lot of people watching probably don't have lawyers. Like, now that this has happened, I mean, I have family friends who, and this also speaks to, privilege and how connected you are. And I have family friends who I could have given their phone number, right? Who are lawyers who they've never represented me, but one is like a former judge, right? So I would feel very comfortable. But for people who don't have those kinds of friends, does this mean, and because they're not supposed to lie to federal officers, I assume you can't say you have representation if you don't? So does
I
that
would
mean you
not
should
say
be in
that you have
touch with?
representation if you don't, but you can say, leave your name and number and a lawyer will call you.
Okay.
And then you can call the National Lawyers Guild Federal Anti-Repression Hotline at 212-679-2811 and leave your name and callback number, and somebody will call you and you can have a free, privileged, and secure conversation about your rights, risks, and responsibilities. And you can be connected with appropriate free legal resources in whatever jurisdiction you're in so that you can have a lawyer make that phone call, right? And if you are traveling internationally, there are some resources, and you should feel free to call that NLG hotline again at 212-679-2811. If you are planning to do international travel, you can call us up and we can try to make sure that you're connected with someone ahead of time and that you have access to, the Know Your Risks materials. I would highly, highly recommend that anyone who's intending to do any international travel right now, take a look at the CUNY Clear website, which is CUNY Clear, CLEAR. And that's cunyclear.org. And they have a lot of really, really good, really understandable Know Your Rights materials in a number of different languages. And I just can't recommend them enough. They do incredible work.
Great. So I just posted so people can see it's on the screen. We'll add it in the YouTube description later. CUNYclear.org. And then can you say the number once more so I can then show that on the screen? It's NLG, which National Lawyers Guild. It's 212.
So this is not the NLG hotline that you would call if you were arrested at a protest. This is the NLG National Anti-Repression Hotline, and it's 212-679-2811.
Okay. So that
and again,
is,
I want to reiterate.
Is that right?
I want to reiterate that we are not trying to help you hide evidence of unlawful conduct. You have rights to privacy. We have curtains on our windows. We have doors on our bathrooms. The government isn't simply entitled to know everything about our lives. And that's not because everything about our lives is illegal. It's because some things are private and you're allowed to have privacy. And that is actually a value that I think we as a culture used to share and has become less important to people, and we've forgotten that it's something we actually are entitled to. So when you're telling, federal agents, I'm not going to answer your questions, it's not because you've done something wrong or because you have something to hide. It's because you're allowed to have privacy.
Right. Yeah. And of course, people like a lot of Trump supporters who claim to be libertarian or small government should, of course, be supporting that privacy, but people can be selective. Well, Mo, thank you so much. I'd love to have you back on, and thank you for this advice. And don't go anywhere, guys,
this
because
was
we're
not
going.
Legal advice.
No, this was not legal advice. This was what, an informational interview or something? Okay, information. Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
You're off duty right now. You are off duty. Thank you for joining, and don't go anywhere, guys, because we're going to be talking to Victor for a little bit, and then we're going to be joined by Nathan Robinson. Okay. Right. Thanks so much, Mo.
Bye.
Great. Bye. Now, Medea Benjamin is actually in an airport, and they are going to be joining us right now. I think so. And then we're going to talk. So it'll be Medea and Victor, and then we're going to be joined by Nathan. Hi, Medea. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thank you. Boy, that was interesting. Sobering.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Medea, you are in an airport. You're not at an international border, so you don't get to test out all the things that Mo just talked about. But I wanted to give you a chance to talk about, especially since we were part of the purpose of this was to not discourage people from participating in delegations like this and visiting Cuba. I want to give you a chance to tell people about what they can do right now if they're interested in supporting the people of Cuba, which is a totally legal thing to do.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Katie. One is to visit Cuba. Cuba wants people to come, even though the situation is difficult, transportation is difficult, and I'm sure you'll talk more about the crisis Cuba is undergoing, but they do want you to come. And from this trip, when we took 170 people in just this one delegation, a lot of people are telling their friends, and their friends want to go. And so we're going to try to have trips every single month. So check in with Code Pink for more trips to Cuba. They'll be small, like 15, 20 people, not the big ones. The other thing is to do fundraisers, because Cuba needs everything, and food and medicines is exempt. You can give food and medicines. So we are going on a regular basis taking food and medicine. We have a wonderful connection with a charter company that allows us to use their the weight when they have extra weight, they let us go for free or take the medicines for free. So we're going to be going actually on Tuesday to the eastern part of the country, taking food and medicine. So you can go to the Code Pink and
Oops.
Because it's a great way to get people together. Can you hear me?
Where can you go? Sorry, you froze for when you were saying that. You can go to the...
You can go to the Code Pink website and you can donate there. But what I really encourage people to do is hold your own fundraisers, because it's a great way to get people together, to talk about the issues. If you've been there, to show some of the slides or videos from your trip. But really getting people together is important in building a movement against what the U.S. is doing. You can donate to Code Pink. The People's Forum has been sending down solar panels as well as medicines, another great place to go. Global Health Partners is fantastic. So there's a lot of places to go to donate. And lastly, I wanted to say that we have something that we haven't had in a long time now, which is a bill in Congress. And that's because there are people in Congress that recognize how dangerous this moment is, and that Trump, after having invaded Venezuela and kidnapped the president and the first lady, might well do the same or worse in the case of Cuba. And so there are resolutions in the House and the Senate called war powers resolutions to say that Trump does not have the right to use armed forces to enforce a blockade of Cuba without congressional approval. And so I want to give the numbers. One is in the Senate and one is in the House. So we need to get our representatives on board to say no to any military intervention or naval blockade, which is pretty much what exists right now. And so on the Senate side, it's SJ, that's Senate Joint Resolution, SJ Res 124 is the number. And on the House side, it's HJ, House Joint Resolution, HJ Res 153. So it's 124 in the Senate and 153 in the House. And these are very, very, very important. And we encourage people to get your representative to even know it exists because they're brand new and get on board.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Medea. And everyone, a lot of people are praising this show, which is so wonderful, and the guests. And you know how you can, besides supporting Cuba, please, this sounds pathetic, it's not for my ego, but like the stream, because only 83 of you have liked it, and over 1,000 have been watching. I know you're not all hate watching. Some of you are hate watching, and I thank you for your clicks if you're hate watching. But like the stream, not because I need to feel validated, although who doesn't want that, but because the more likes, then the more people come see the stream and see these wonderful guests. And Medea, we'll put the links to that later. And I'll be doing a webinar with you on Monday, actually. And we'll probably be streaming it from this channel also. That's at 7 p.m.
Wonderful. Great. So if you can put me backstage, I'll say goodbye and listen to your great guests.
Great. Thanks, Medea. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye. By the way, Victor, I want you to respond to something because, and Victor, let me just say who Victor is. Victor is amazing. And Victor, I just met on this delegation, and that's another great reason to go on these delegations, because not only are the trips and what you learn there amazing, and the people that you meet there in the country are amazing, but also you'll meet people who go on the delegation with you who are amazing. So who is Victor? Victor is a Dominican American natural gas first responder and union member of IBEW Local 1820 from Perth Amboy, New Jersey. He is a member of ANTICONQUISTA, an anti-imperialist media collective, and recently joined the Venezuela Solidarity Network. A longtime supporter of the Cuban Revolution, he participated in the Nuestra America Solidarity Convoy to Cuba in March 2025 and is active with the Hands Off Cuba Committee. And Victor, what I was going to playfully ask you to respond to, and I don't know if it's still up on the screen, but was someone saying like, oh, how nice for a privileged white woman to tell the Cuban people how to live. The suggestion being, I guess, that's what Medea Benjamin does. That's what this convoy was doing. What are your thoughts on Cuba, and is going to visit Cuba and is calling for the end of a blockade a privileged position that is dictating to the Cuban people what they want?
No, that's a ridiculous argument. That doesn't make any sense. So with regards to the economic crisis, it's pretty much that Cuba's economy has been suffering forever, pretty much. Let's be honest. And it has nothing to do with socialism or the Cuban Revolution. If the conversation doesn't start and end with the blockade, we can't have a serious conversation. My parents come from the Dominican Republic. I've had this conversation with a lot of my compatriotas from the Dominican Republic, my family and friends. And I always, when I couch that argument that way, if I say to any Dominican, hey, can you imagine a blockade against the Dominican Republic for 60 something years? Everyone always says, oh my God, no, it would destroy the economy. It's just common sense. And so then when you talk about the latest measures of January 29th, where the Trump administration labeled Cuba an extraordinary and unusual threat to the United States, which it isn't, and making sure that Cuba doesn't get oil, and it hasn't received oil in 3 months. The crisis is even, it's been escalated that much more. When we talk about Cuba as a small little tiny nation, you just can't do anything without oil. It's impossible. The hospitals are being affected. The schools are being affected. Transportation is being affected. Their natural gas infrastructure is being affected. The water purification systems are being affected. The sewer system is being affected. We've seen the images. We have some of these images ourselves and we saw them. We saw as we walked by the garbage not being picked up. That's a service that normally would get taken care of, but they can't do it because of the crisis. And so, I've heard all these I've been, since I came back, I've been seeing all these weird arguments of, why we were there and what we were doing there. And they're just a bunch of lies, and people just need to stop listening to this nonsense because it's just not true. Some people are being paid to say some of these things. Some people just hate, the Cuban Revolution, and they have an agenda. The reality is that Cuban people don't deserve this. They don't. No one deserves this. What we do, what our government does in our name, what it does to these people is it's criminal, it's illegal, it's inhumane, and they just really don't deserve it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very upsetting to see. And, something that I also want to point out is that the Cuban people, they remind me of the Palestinian people in that they are so, I'm obviously generalizing, I'm not fetishizing, I'm just saying generally the character is that they are so gracious and hospitable and generous, and they're, they may not have, but they'll still give you something, like even if you have more than they do, they'll want to give you something. This is the fourth time I was there, and there is a level of homelessness. I mean, it pales. It's not comparable to the United States at all. It just speaks to how there used to be very, very, very little homelessness, and there is more now, and that's one of the effects of the blockade. But it's interesting because look, everyone can criticize the government, and people will do that there. People are happy to do that there. They'll just talk to you on the streets. But I really like the way you put it, Vic, which is that if you don't put the blockade as the context in which every other thing has to be discussed, then you're either lying or you're ignorant, and you're not really worth talking to. I guess if you're ignorant, you could be worth talking to if you're open-minded. But yeah, again, it's like imagine, I don't know, like, well, I'll try to think of a better analogy.
It's just gaslighting. It's like the craziest gaslight ever. It's like, oh, you see how terrible the economy is, but then you don't want to mention this big part.
Yeah, why? Exactly.
Yeah,
why?
The why. Right.
Yeah. And so they pretend, oh, it's socialism, it's this, that, the other. It's like, well, first of all, no, because we actually saw differences, right? Whether like it is shaped by external forces. Like there was a difference between what it was like under Obama and what's like now. But also, the argument I love is that this is a failed state. Okay, if it's a failed state, let it fail then. Why do you have to impose this blockade? If it's so dysfunctional, it'll fall apart on its own. And I think the fact that it's been around as long as it has, and not just been around, but the fact that since 1960, we know from the Mallory memo that the State Department said that they wanted to get rid of the government. And because of Fidel Castro's popularity, the best way to do that was like sow discord by creating hunger. And that policy has basically remained in place since 1960.
And it's failed.
The fact that this country is still around the way it is, the Cuban people, the Cuban project, also the fact that Castro lived until 90 when they tried to kill him, like literally over 600 times. All of this speaks to the incredible commitment. And again, I'm not saying it's easy. I spoke with a lot of people. I'm sure you did too, Vic. They are, up to here. They keep saying something has to give. They're saying something has to change. Now, for us, we want that thing to be obviously lifting the blockade. But the fact that there hasn't been the uprising that America wants so much, despite the boot on their necks, is pretty incredible to me.
Absolutely. And here's the thing that.
Can you move the mic a little closer? Sorry.
Oh, sure. Here's the thing that we have to take into account. The reality is that many people stood to gain from the revolution, and they defend that revolution. We really got to get this notion out of our head that whatever we do is going to somehow affect their revolution. It's just not. What we need is, look, we have international laws. We have to respect international laws. Cuba is a sovereign and free nation, whether we like their system or not. And I enjoy their system. I think it's good. It works for them. It doesn't matter. We should just be respecting them. And it's a silly policy at this point. It's not going to change anything. This idea that, again, we're going to continue on with this policy. Now, okay, let's do this oil blockade. And now that's going to do it. No, it's like we didn't see it. Did you see any protests out there, Katie?
Mm-mm.
We saw blackouts and there were still no protests.
Yeah.
I mean, another thing that's really interesting, if you would allow me to talk about it, and this is my first trip, I saw very little police out there. And the reason for that, and I've always known this, is that for folks who don't know, Cuba is safe. It's a safe country. It's one of the safest countries in the hemisphere. It's one of the safest places in the world. Now, understand that, again, my family comes from the Dominican Republic. I have to behave a certain type of way when I'm in the Dominican Republic because you got to be a little bit of a gangster out there. You got to make sure that nobody's gonna. So you got to put your shield up. You have to. Your face has to look a certain way. You have to react a certain way when people approach you. I didn't feel that in Cuba at all, because they're a nonviolent, peaceful people. They're an educated people, a cultured people, and so you just don't have the random acts of violence that you would see right here in Newark, New Jersey, where I'm from, or in Camden, New Jersey, or in Orange. You don't see that out there, and so there's no need for police. Another thing, and allow me a second to talk about this next little anecdote, which I just found, again, for folks that are watching at home, they're like, well, that's normal. It's not normal in the Dominican Republic. I thought it was so fascinating that Cubans drive in a very, very orderly and safe manner. They stop at the red lights, they stop at the stop signs, they stop at the intersections. They're very aware of their surroundings. And people may say, well, what's so special about that? Again, go to the Dominican Republic, go to Puerto Rico, go right here in Jersey.
Washington
Heights. I mean, it was remarkable. I couldn't believe it. I was like, wait a minute, they actually follow the laws here. Like, I'm not saying one or two of them, everyone.
Right.
So I found that fascinating. And so Cuba's a special, magical place.
Yeah.
I think I've been telling people that I think Cubans are superhumans with superpowers. I haven't met this type of human being ever in my life. Like, the conversations are so rich and profound.
Yes.
It's just amazing. Everywhere I went, I just was amazed by the Cuban people. It's just fascinating. It was just a fascinating experience.
Yeah. And, people are allowed to have their critiques and preferences, right? But we have to respect sovereignty. And the people who have no leg to stand on at all are the people who claim to care about the Cuban people and then say, this blockade is good. Because if you care about the Cuban people, as opposed to your weird grievance politics or your vicious hate or you're a vindictive person, of course, no matter what you think of the government, you would not want the people to be suffering. And, it's actually, I said this on another show that we did with Danny Valdez, who was one of the part of the Cuban Americans for Cuba delegation, which is so important, that delegation, that organization. It's like what we see in Iran. With Iran, when you hear an Iranian American say, oh, we love the Iranian people and that's why the United States needs to bomb them, like, who are you kidding? No one takes that seriously. You don't love the Iranian people because you're calling for their deaths. You don't love the Iranian people. And I don't care what, like, we had a fascinating guest on our show who was actually on death row in Tehran. And he is so crystal clear. Like, he wants there to be a different kind of government. I'm looking to see if I have the book right here. Oh, yeah. He wants there to be a different kind of government, but he's not a sadist. So he doesn't want the bombs. He doesn't want the sanctions, So he wrote, this is really good. The Long War in Iran, New Event, Old Questions by Behruz Gamari. We had him on Useful Idiots. But, the lack of humanity in anyone who wants the people to suffer just needs to be called out. I don't care what your politics are. There's no justification for that. It's cruel.
At what point do we say, like, enough isn't, like, how many more new enemies do we need to conjure up? Every time there's a new enemy, there's a new boogeyman. Dominicans know this word. There's a new cuco that we got to go and point to. Oh, here's the bad guy. It's ridiculous. The world wants to be at peace, and the United States is an existential threat to literally everyone at this point. We're sanctioning like 3/4 of the world. We're constantly threatening and bullying. I mean, Trump is just in this region alone. He's threatened Mexico. He did what he did on January 3rd with Venezuela. Yeah. He's threatening Cuba. He's threatened Colombia. It's just, we just need to figure out a way to stop this, because it's ridiculous. So yeah, I mean, the people who say those type of things, I really can't take you serious.
Yeah. It's disgusting. Sorry, I'm just, because I have these new devices. I usually have everything on my laptop, so apologies for looking down. I want to know what you think of the way that Cuba deals with its healthcare, with its poverty, because again, you are someone who, your family comes from the Dominican Republic, and so lots of times people will compare the way people live in Cuba to the way people live in the United States. And what I'll say, as someone who's a U.S. citizen, that what's fascinating is that what they do there with such few resources is incredible, puts us to shame. Like, they will do all this preemptive medical care. So the second you get pregnant, they visit you. Like, you can get visits whenever you want. You can live out in the countryside. A doctor and a nurse will visit you. They'll give you vitamins. They talk about nutrition. They will, it's interesting. You said they're not a threat to the United States. They are a threat to the United States way of life. I don't mean of our ways of life. I mean the government. I mean the oligarchs and the oppressors and the elites, because they show that you don't need to be driven by greed to make major innovations. They discovered the meningitis vaccine. They don't have a profit-based healthcare system or research system. They discovered a revolutionary treatment for Alzheimer's. They have a revolutionary treatment for diabetes that prevents a lot of amputations. They have a lung cancer vaccine. And the fact that they do these things and prioritize these things, and they have so few resources, is incredible. Meanwhile, we let people die of a disease or an accident or an injury if they don't have the right health care. It's really unbelievable.
Yeah, so a lot of my notes were on my cell phone device, and that's been taken away. But here's what I would say. Again, for the folks, a lot of times we do these programs, and we're it's like an echo chamber. But for the folks who don't understand anything about Cuba, just understand that Cuba has, there's certain things about that are unique to the Cuban system, and when we talk about healthcare and education, those are hallmarks. Those are like things that they've invested so much in their healthcare system, in their education system, it's known worldwide that Cuba has a great medical system, a great healthcare system. And in fact, they have the ELAM school where they teach students from all over the world. Right. I have a friend, his mother's Dominican. He's an American. His mother's Dominican and a nurse. His father is Peruvian and a doctor. And he went and studied medicine in Cuba for free. So folks, if you want to study medicine as an American, it's an accredited school. You can go there and study for free. They will teach you for free, and you could become a doctor, come back. Their only requirement is that whichever country you go back to, so wherever you came from, that you go back to a poor barrio, a poor neighborhood, and serve the neediest. And so, it's just, people really need to study the Cuban Revolution because it is unique in that sense. A word that you constantly hear over there in Cuba is solidarity. They repeat that word over and over and over, talking about solidarity. And it's about humans really taking care of one another. And it's just different. It's like we live in this super capitalist country over here where we worship celebrities and the neighbors don't talk to one another, and there's no sense of community in a lot of places. In Cuba, it's the opposite. It's just the complete opposite. There's this strong sense of community, strong sense of belonging, of making sure people take care of one another. Again, the education system is phenomenal. And like you said, they with the little that they have, they share whatever little that they have, and they make sure that they take care of each other through their healthcare system, through the education system. I did get to meet one of the doctors that does the international missions, and I said to him, what did you make of Marco Rubio's statement that, essentially you're being pimped out by the Cuban government and that you're being exploited as a doctor, as a worker? And he looked at me in the eye and he said, we take great offense to that. Don't ever repeat those things over here, because we take great offense to that. He goes, I've been on 3 separate missions. He goes, and I will go to wherever the revolution sends me. And he goes, and you can ask any of the other doctors here, and we will repeat the same thing to you. So, I mean, this is what the Cuban Revolution is about. Whether you like their system or not, again, it's a free and sovereign nation. You don't have to like it, but we don't have to keep punishing these people.
Yeah, and they, I will say that they have incredible foreign policy. I mean, I don't think the United States has been on the right side of a foreign policy issue since World War II, and they didn't even join that for the right reasons.
Right.
But Cuba is always sending doctors somewhere where they need it. They've eradicated certain eye diseases. They were with the people in Angola fighting against apartheid. South Africa, they were, working with the Palestinians with Maurice Bishop in Grenada, which is a whole story that no one even knows about. They care about, Ireland. They have a real anti-colonial struggle, and it is incredible. And the kids are amazing. The kids are so cute and cultured and educated. And I think that, another thing that's so important, though, is if you look at the poverty in places like the Dominican Republic or Haiti, I mean, you'll see people living in conditions that you don't see in Cuba. Now, again, we are very clear-eyed on how dangerous it is, what the United States is doing. But we also have to remember that you don't see the kind of poverty in Cuba that you'll see in other neighboring countries. And, Cuba has a lot of the people in the Caribbean respect Cuba because of Cuba being on the right side of so many issues. And, speaking of what we saw in Cuba and also so many of the smears and talking points, I wanted to bring onto the show Nathan Robinson, the journalist and the editor of Current Affairs, who does great work. Everyone should subscribe to them. And also, I'm going to, by the way, be doing a stream on Tuesday, my regular Tuesday night show. So we'll have a lot of stuff to show you from Cuba, including some really cool photos of an interview that I did with Jeremy Corbyn, which was amazing. And Nathan has a really fun, hilarious video of Jeremy Corbyn speaking to a little kid. But I'm going to bring on Nathan. But before I do, please do like the stream, and also please do become Patreon supporters. If you can do it at just $1 a month, you help make the show happen. We literally couldn't do it without your support. Not to sound corny, but it's true. And you go to patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. And if you can afford $5 a month, you get all sorts of extended interviews and bonus content. And in fact, I'm going to be dropping a lot of early release stuff from Cuba. But of course, we don't paywall discussions like these. We would never paywall a discussion about Know Your Rights. We don't paywall discussions with like Gaza doctors. I'm not going to paywall the discussion that I'm having on Tuesday night, which is going to be great, with Ed Augustine, who's a journalist based in Cuba. He had the front page article in the New York Times about hospitals. And, it is atrocious and disgusting that Cuba used to have a better maternal mortality rate than the United States. And for the first time, it's worse. And that is not because of socialism, because that hasn't changed. It's because of the blockade. Nathan, welcome.
Hey, Katie. Nice to
Thanks
see
for
you
coming.
again.
Of course.
Last time I saw you, we were in Cuba.
I know. Tell us your impressions of Cuba. And you're such a great debunker. So you did this whole piece, how to smear a humanitarian mission, because people may notice that people are obsessed with Hassan Piker, and Hassan Piker does so much good work and brings a lot of attention. But of course, it brings out the haters because people can't stand that someone's so popular and it is not like a manosphere bro. So there was a lot of propaganda. So what are your impressions, Nathan? And then tell us what you think the most important misconceptions are to debunk.
Yeah, so it was heartbreaking. I mean, I'm sure you had the same experience. It's such a beautiful country. You were just talking about what Cubans are like. I mean, I hadn't, met Cubans in Cuba before. This was my first time going, and they're just incredible people. I met so many people who just warmly embraced me, and and it's this incredible country. But you see immediately the effects of the U.S. policy. I mean, you could see how few cars were on the road. We went on a bus from the convention center back to downtown Havana. We were just going through neighborhoods. This was before the nationwide blackout. This was the first thing I noticed was before the whole country got blacked out, we were going through neighborhoods. They have rolling blackouts, and just going through places where every single house was dark, and then you would see people moving in the shadows, and suddenly you would realize, there are people trying to live their lives in this darkness. And then I was seeing people walking down the road next to the bus, and I was realizing with all the street lights out, and you realize how unsafe this is for people. And then, of course, there are so many cascading effects, right? So the fuel prices make it difficult for taxi drivers to operate. The tourism has gone down, which means that you saw, while you were there, all these people who depend on tourists really struggling. I just went to the art market, and the art market was a heartbreaking place to be because there were hundreds of Cuban artists selling handicrafts, selling paintings. And, I was one of the only visitors there, and everyone's so desperate to sell a painting or to sell a cigar box, and just you could see the despair that this normal the source of income had just dried up because of this fuel blockade. You mentioned the article in the New York Times about which was actually pretty good. They did run a pretty terrible article about Hassan Piker, but they read a pretty good article that was documenting all of the effects on the hospitals. And of course, the hospitals are running low on power, and they document all the ways they're trying to keep machinery going. But as we know, and this was used as a knock against the humanitarian aid flotilla, as we know, during that time, one of the most disturbing things was that the power stayed on in the hotels. And the power stayed on in the hotels because there is a specific U.S. policy that allowed private corporations in Cuba an exemption from the fuel blockade. And in fact, this is even the Cuban president, I think, Diaz-Canel, has not been that precise about this because he said no fuel had entered the country. He could have said, and I think should have said, that no fuel has gotten to ordinary Cubans because the United States only allows fuel to be imported by private corporations to be used for the generators at fancy hotels. And that gets us kind of to the misinformation part of it, where, we saw directly all of the consequences of this. All these neighborhoods plunged into blackness while the hotels still had power. You talk to doctors who are struggling, talk to, service workers who, really saw this up close. And then, I didn't have my phone working in Cuba. I didn't really have access to Wi-Fi. So I was very surprised when, towards the end, I found out how this had been presented by a bunch of people on social media and in the right-wing press, where they were saying, oh, this is like a poverty tourism by influencers. This aid mission that brought tons and tons of aid that is trying to draw attention.
We didn't even talk about how much aid,
Yeah. And so it was really, we've written this comprehensive debunk, but all the talking points were ridiculous. All saying, they were staying in fancy hotels and using all the power and,
Or the kneecap concert caused a blackout.
Using the resources that belong to the Cuban people. One of my key takeaways was actually what Medea said was, people need to go to Cuba. If you think that they don't want you to go because of the shortages, you're so wrong. Because what I saw was all of the, the street musicians and cafes and taxis, all really desperate for tourists that weren't there. And because people weren't going, there were all these people whose livelihoods had just been destroyed. So, the right-wing narrative got it totally backwards when they suggested these people going are parasitic on the Cuban people. Everyone I talked to was so delighted to have Americans coming.
Yeah, and another thing about the hospitals is that it's not that Cuba keeps the lights on in hotels and not on in hospitals, which is what a lot of people said. As you pointed out, there are exemptions. Like the hotels are owned by private companies, foreign governments, like foreign companies. So we stayed in a Spanish hotel. And the reason we were in a fancier hotel is because there are only a few hotels that you're allowed to stay in because of what the U.S. government requires. And we could have, I think a lot of people would have been much more comfortable in in these casas particulares, but there were so many of us and we had to be in the same place. So we didn't have the other option. But, they do prioritize, they have generators, they have solar panels, they do everything they can to keep the electricity in hospitals. And they also will do things like, they're so creative about this stuff. So if a ventilator goes down, they will use like a handheld thing. And I'm really excited to talk about this stuff with people on Tuesday on the Katie Halper Show on Tuesday. But, that is why people love the idea that Cuba, cares more about hotels and hospitals. It's really not true. It's the United States that cares more about hotels and hospitals because it's they who are siphoning off oil, giving it to hotels and not allowing it to get to the hospitals.
Katie, I don't know if you had things that surprised you in Cuba, but one of the things that I think maybe surprised me was that, I mean, even though a lot of the members of the group, not me and not people in my group the day before, a lot of people got detained. It was very difficult to get back into the country. However, one of the surprises for me from the trip was how straightforward it is for Americans to go to Cuba and bring aid that helps Cuba. So we had someone in the delegation who was bringing a suitcase full of solar panels, brought them, gave them to people. They were delighted. It made a huge difference. And one of the really striking takeaways for me was, my God, this is like a flight from Miami. This is like a 1-hour flight. You can load a plane up with supplies. The supplies are needed. They're useful. I mean, more people could do this. This can be done. And there's all this like effort to make it seem like it's hard to go to Cuba. And in fact, a lot of Americans are under a mistaken impression about this, where I talk to lots of people who are like, oh, you're allowed to go to Cuba? Do you have to go through Mexico? No, there are flights.
I barely knew this, and I've been 3 times before. Yeah, you can go. American Airlines has flights. Yeah, you need a humanitarian. You go and support the Cuban people, which is very easy because literally when you pay for things there, you're supporting the Cuban people. But also, you bring, if you want to bring humanitarian aid, medical aid. I mean, we brought tons of that. I just want to read something that you wrote in your piece, Nathan. In one of your pieces, you wrote 2 amazing pieces, but in one of them you wrote, our government is systematically torturing the Cuban people. It is doing so purposefully in order to extract concessions from the Cuban government. Not human rights concessions, mind you, but favorable investment terms. For a rich country to punish a poor country like this is morally grotesque. The issue is not difficult to grasp. So why do you call it systematic torture?
Well, I mean, because that's what the consequences are for people. I mean, people only need to read that article about the effects on babies and on infant mortality to see that we're talking about, killing people. The policy causes deaths. The policy causes suffering. The policy is designed to cause suffering because the United States is trying to get leverage for political concessions, as I mentioned there, from Cuba. Now, I mean, this is
what is it? It's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, this has been the U.S. policy towards Cuba going back to right after the revolution. I mean, it's very striking. What I discuss in some of the articles that we've done, some of the history here, and the Eisenhower administration and the Kennedy administration, who basically came up with plans that they were very open about, where they said, we need to strangle the Cuban economy. Lyndon Johnson, who it was always colorful, said we need to pinch Cuba's nuts. Now, what he meant by that is we need to damage the economy. And when you damage the economy, what do? You destroy people's livelihoods. You keep them poor. And they were keeping them poor in order to punish them for a few things, for overthrowing the U.S.-backed dictator. We're very resentful that they'd done that, for nationalizing the assets of U.S. corporations, and for aligning with the Soviet Union. At no point did the United States care at all about human rights and democracy in Cuba, because we were aligned during the Cold War with plenty of dictatorships. We're aligned with plenty of dictatorships now. But you see the substance of the negotiations going on right now between the U.S. and the Cuban government are things like the Cuban government offering to let Cuban nationals in the United States invest in Cuba, or the Cuban government, the latest concession was they offered to pay a lump sum to compensate for the nationalization of American property after the revolution. That's extracting billions of dollars from a country that is completely broke and transferring it to the wealthiest country in the world, which, I mean, is an incredibly twisted thing. But those are the sorts of negotiations that are ongoing. They're not negotiations for freer elections in Cuba or anything like that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, why would we? Yeah, of course not. And one of the things that's helpful about Trump is he is so mask off, right? Like we've seen.
I'm going to take it.
Yeah, we're going to take it. Yeah, it's really disgusting. And Danny Valdez, who's one of the Cuban Americans, who's great. I had him on my show right when he had made that comment, and Danny said something like, "You can really see the pedophilia like showing through, because it's such a disgusting, like violatory, like rapacious comment about taking Cuba." And Vic, what else do you want to make sure that people know about? Since we're talking about what we observed, and I would also ask both of you to comment, if you'd like, on the connections between what the United States is doing to Cuba and what the United States is doing to Iran, what the United States is doing to Palestine. What connections do you guys see? And Venezuela, of course.
Yeah. Well, I just also wanted to point out, I'm going to read some of the points right here from Cold Pink.
Sure.
I'll get back to with your question there, but there were a lot of hit pieces on what we were doing and what we were not doing out there, and it's just BS. A bunch of it is just outright lies, and these are twisted narratives about what we were doing out there. But more than $400,000 worth of humanitarian supplies were put on that charter flight. Over $500,000 worth of solar panels, over 2,000 pounds of medical supplies came from Europe, over $23,000 worth of cancer medicines, around let's see here, over 1,000 pounds of medical supplies from Brazil, so on and so forth. So I mean, and to Nathan's point, when everywhere I went, when people recognized who we were, or the conversation came up, people were holding back tears and thanking us. They would often put their hands over their heart, and they would say things like, "You have no idea how much this means to us." And you could just look into their eyes and just realize like how much this meant to them, and Nathan brought up the point of like, go to Cuba, this can be done. And I would agree with him. I'm going next month with a small delegation. We are going there with an agenda, but I do hope this inspires more people to put together their own delegations, and maybe we could help them out in doing so. But yeah, that's what Cuba needs. Cuba, that's done so much for the rest of the world with their international with their foreign policy of sending doctors all over the world. You talked about their anti-colonial solidarity efforts in places like Africa and in places like Central America. So Cuba deserves this. At the very least, we should be in solidarity with Cuba, who's been in solidarity with the rest of the world forever, since the Cuban Revolution. As far as making the connections with the rest of the world, I mean, look, I think our United States empire it's desperate. This is a fight for resources and power and geopolitical power all over the world, and I believe that there's a growing concern of a movement where, look, it kind of like the gig is up. Like, everybody knows at this point, like, the empire is desperate. It's thirsty for resources, and they're afraid of people uniting and being in solidarity with one another. And so, Venezuela, Iran, Libya, Iraq, all these places, Syria, like, oil is the name of the game in all these places. And what they did on January 3rd, immediately, if I tell folks, go watch the press conference of Marco Rubio, the President Trump, Pete Hegseth on January 3rd, one of the first things that were coming out of the mouth was about the oil, like, how we're gonna what we're gonna do about the oil situation, right? Because that's why they did what they did with Venezuela. And I do think some of that what happened in Venezuela was como decimos nosotros dominicanos, like how we Dominicans say, like, that was for show, because I think they could have done a lot of this with President Maduro. They chose to do it just to do it, and immediately threaten the rest of the region. But then immediately after that, the attacks on Iran, we're taking Cuba. You know how offensive that is to say something like that? I mean, all of Latin America, with the exception of Cuba, with the exception of Puerto Rico, all of these territories, Spanish-speaking territories, are sovereign nations. We fought against Spain for our liberation, and to say something like that, like this administration is trying to take us back 200 years. It's offensive. So, the connections there, again, I just think that the empire is completely desperate. And like any desperate person, they lash out and attack. And I think they're concerned. I think what we need is more solidarity, and we need to figure out, we need some real serious political discussions here in the United States about how we attain political power. That's lately what's been on my mind. But I'll turn it over to Nathan.
By the way, I just had to read a comment because sometimes you really like see. I know people don't like it when I show the haters, but this is such a great contrast. So first we have someone writes from a Cuban American to my heart, which is beautiful to see, and then we have this person, and this is a really offensive comment. No, never. Mexico isn't a friend. We don't want the Black people of Cuba. So if you want to see like the difference, like the moral arc here, or the right and wrong, who's on the side of the Cuban people, who's not, you got a Cuban American who appreciates this view, because I assume this Cuban American cares about people, and you have a racist, like an open racist. And that's another thing that's fascinating. Like again, you don't get rid of racism is not easily oh, hi, Abel. Oh, we love Abel. Racism is not something that you can eradicate, but the things that they've done in Cuba, when you compare it to other countries around there, are incredible. And
I tell people, read the first and second Declaration of Havana so you could understand the revolution a little bit better. Those are easy reads that you can read within a few days.
And it's interesting because it's hard to explain, but in the United States, there's so much pandering about racial justice and racial equality. And, the Democrats, what do? They would like go on a knee. They wear kente cloths and stuff. But if you hear the stuff that Fidel Castro says about like the heritage of the Cuban people and the inheritance of the, Spanish, the Taino, and the African cultures, like it really is quite moving. It's for me, I find it really, really moving. I don't think it's pandering. And I think that you don't really have that in other countries. Like you haven't had leaders in other comparable countries who have kind of you don't say that's in Spanish, they say like revindicated it. It's like have not glorified, exalted the people who are so it's just built into the vocabulary to be kind of demeaned. I mean, I'm sure that's something I assume that you can see the difference like between the Dominican Republic and Cuba. I mean, look how the Dominican Republic treats Haitians, but there's so much colorism within the actual Dominican Republic. Good hair.
This is a big problem in the Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
And we have not been able to, so much like in the United States where we want to blame the other for our problems are created by our political elites. Right. The Dominican Republic, it's easy. The Dominican elites, political elites, teach the Dominican people to blame the Haitians for the problems of Dominicans. Meanwhile, right. The Dominican politicians are stealing and robbing and corrupt. And so yeah, that's a serious problem in the Dominican Republic, a serious problem.
Yeah. And then I just wanted to mention another thing, by the way, and then I'll throw it back to you, Nathan. But something that we talked about this earlier. I do think that it's worth telling people that speaking of like dividing and conquering and pitting people against each other, and racism and xenophobia, when we were in that room, so what happened is that they took us, what we didn't actually narrate what happened because we wanted to make sure that Moira got to get out all this important info. But what happened was we went back on a charter and there was only like 20 of us, right? So the entire group went out on Monday on a charter. Some people took commercial flights, but a bunch of people took a charter. And then that charter came back on, someone writes, Katie Halper's a communist sympathizer. Yeah, wow, I'm so exposed. I can't believe you said that. What am I going to do? I was trying this whole time to come off as a fascist. Anyway, so we all go out on Monday on a charter. And then Friday. And then a bunch of people came back on Monday, but a smaller group of us came back on Wednesday. And every single one of us got pulled when we were giving our passports, walking through customs. We were put into like a waiting room, and it was us and a couple other people who weren't with our convoy. And they, from what I could tell, they were people who were not. They looked like they spoke Spanish, at least like a couple of them. I think they maybe were. I assume that, I don't know, but maybe they weren't born in the United States. Not that any of this matters, but. We were in this room, you weren't allowed to use your phones, and then they called us one by one. And what they did with me is they went through my bags, like every single thing in the bags. And then after that, they brought me into a room that had like a mirrored wall, like they do in, on Law and Order or whatever. It's a one-way mirror. And there, I have to say, like, I was a lot I'm a white U.S. citizen, and my parents are white U.S. citizens, and I felt really powerless and scared. And I can't imagine how scary it is for people who are either undocumented or have undocumented people in their family. It is like I'm a pretty assertive person. I felt like so shut down. I honestly didn't even, this is so weird. I had no sense of time. I had no idea how long I was in there. The only way I knew was was based on text messages I had sent before and after, but I didn't even check my watch. Or if I did, I forgot what the times were. Like there's something very scary that goes on in there. I think you have more, like you're more disciplined, Vic, and probably more prepared and stuff than I was. But I just did want to say that it's a very disturbing experience. You feel like you're kind of in a no man's land.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be honest. You know, look, on the exterior I look disciplined and everything like that, and the inside, yeah, I was also terrified as well because I knew exactly what was happening while it was happening. Because I'm gonna just read some of the names. So it was you, Katie Halper. It was Chuck Modiano, Chris Smalls, the Amazon Labor Union or founder, Lavish from Impress. I think there was a few other journalists there. I'm nobody, but you know, ANTICONQUISTA has like 177,000 followers or whatever. I think they knew Leonardo Flores from the Venezuela Solidarity Network,
right?
And you know, so they knew exactly who we were. At one point, they had me in a room. The agent walks out, and I'm just kind of listening while they're in the hallway, and they're making fun of us, and they're saying the names. And so they knew exactly who we were. So for me,
I didn't know that they were making fun of us.
Yeah, they knew. Yeah, so they were making fun of Chris, Lavish, and a few other. But they they were saying some of the names. I didn't hear your name specifically, but they were talking about, I had this one and I had this one.
Right.
So they must have had already an intel report on each and every one of us. And with me, when they searched my bags, they didn't really care about the books that I had bought. They didn't care about anything that was in my bags. They wanted my cell phone, and then they kept asking me questions. I just kept repeating the same answers, and I kept giving them public information. At some point, I know you mentioned before when we had Mo on about the report. Well, when he got to the report part, he said, "Hey, buddy, I'm going to ask you a few more questions. I got to fill out this report. If you could just help me out here." And then I said to him, "Well, at this point, if you're going to ask me more questions, I do need an attorney." And then he just kind of looked at me. There was a weird pause, and I said, "No disrespect, but I need an attorney."
Right.
And then there was another weird pause, and he said, "All right, you know what? I respect that." And then that's when he let me go. But I never got my cell phone back. So yeah,
Right.
The whole thing, and then I heard all the other experiences. I'm very convinced that this was two things. We were politically targeted. They knew exactly who we were. So before we got to the airport, they already had a file on every one of us.
Right.
And not that we were doing anything illegal or wrong or criminal, but look, for whatever it's worth, again, Katie, you have almost 500,000 followers on YouTube. Chris Smalls.
Oh, subscribe if you haven't already. Hit subscribe and then the bell. Sorry.
There you go. So, so on and so forth. With Leonardo, they were specifically asking him about Venezuela, not even Cuba, Venezuela.
Right.
So to me, and based off of some of the comments that I heard while I was waiting in the room, they knew exactly who we were. And, they were just gathering intelligence, and it's just kind of disgusting because it's like, it's not like we weren't doing anything wrong.
Nope.
Right? We weren't doing anything illegal, but it was political targeting. We were politically targeted. It's kind of silly. It's like, this is what's going on. So,
and it was also, again, it was a smaller group. So It was like easy pickings for them, right? Like if it had been the bigger group, it would have been a lot more work.
Yeah, we got through 5. We went on I was in the Monday group, and we mostly, I think maybe 1 or 2 people got pulled aside, but mostly, it was the easiest thing in the world. You go up, they take a picture of you, it goes bing, and then they just let you into the country. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that even if they, there was obviously no evidence of any actual crime they were looking for, even if they're not going to do anything with anything they get out of you, what they have successfully done is raised the costs of going to Cuba. I mean, they have made it so that, based on your experience, people will think twice before going there because they know they might lose their phone. They know they might get into a circumstance that's quite scary. They have made it so that something that is perfectly legal, as we've said, which is going to Cuba, bringing aid, coming back, totally legal, totally fine. But what can they do? They can make that inconvenient. They can make it scary for you. Katie, I was wondering, and Victor, could you tell me a little bit more about what kinds of questions specifically they were asking, what they seem to be trying to get out of you?
Well, yeah, there's social mapping is what a lot of people are saying they're trying to do, like putting together networks. And they asked what we did there, who we met with, about the organization we went with. Is there a convoy? They asked, I filled out the form because I didn't know you couldn't. So they put out, what was really interesting is they asked education and on the form, and they said, I put down college, and he was like, okay, so college. So is that a master's, bachelor's? I was like, a bachelor's. And then he was like, and which college? Like, I feel like they were really trying to put it together. I mean, maybe they were wondering if I had gone to Columbia or something. I mean, Wesleyan is a pretty, lefty school. So, but they also asked, who we met with, if I had bought cigars or rum. I was like chit-chatting them because I'm not gonna lie. Like, I was trying to, you want to like Vic, you were saying to me that, like, we know who our enemies are, but that doesn't mean that you don't want it to de-escalate or make it as untense as possible. Other people want it to be tense, and they kind of want to make a stand that way. I have absolutely no interest in that. Like, I want to choose my battles, and that's not going to be that. No disrespect for people who want to be more strident, but so I was talking, one of them was like, telling me where he was from, and we were talking about New York and this and the other. But what I did say, I just think that, well, Mo says I shouldn't say what. I think it's safer to not say what I did or I said. I should just talk about what they did and they said. So I'll stick to that. Yeah. Not that I said anything remotely problematic, but I just don't want to give them anything. Yeah.
And I think, as I understand it, the best legal advice is to not go down those roads as much as you can. Right. Don't let them get you into even small talk, because all of the small talk is probative. I mean, they are trained to try and get your guard down. Right. But all of it is hostile. I mean, you should assume that nothing that they do or say is an honest representation of who they really are. And the best advice is to give them only the information that you are legally required to give them, and not a single thing in addition to that, because anything else is an attempt to harm you and your political movement.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, with me, they were asking similar questions. They didn't ask me about cigars or anything like that, but they said, so why were you there? How long were you there? Who you were meeting with? And they just kept repeating like very similar or same questions in different styles. And and my response to almost everything was, I was there for humanitarian aid. I was there because this was educational and cultural. And I just kept repeating the same thing over and over. At some point, they were like, so who did you go with? Well, it's public information that we were with Code Pink. That's not anything, Yeah. So I said, yeah, I was with Code Pink. So how long have you been a member of Code Pink? I'm not a member of Code Pink. And then they would circle back to that. Well, how long have you been a member of Code Pink? I already told you I'm not a member of Code Pink. So it's like, I gave them anything that was public information. And then I stopped at the point where he said he wanted to file a report, and he wanted me to help him with that. And at that point I said, yeah, I'm going to need an attorney. I've already answered all the questions I'm obligated to answer. I'm going to need an attorney. And that's where it got a little awkward. And, he let me go.
Right. Yeah. By the way, there's a hater in the comments who's like, is this their first time living in the U.S.? No, I've been to Cuba 3 times. It's never happened to me. I've been to Argentina. I've been to Mexico. I've been to Dominican Republic. I've been to Greece. I've been to Switzerland. I've been to England, Ireland, Scotland. I've been to Morocco. I've been to, where else? I mean, many more countries than I just named. So, not that it's kind of neither here nor there, but it's not like having traveled in the past means that you're going to get stopped this way. But and the truth is, like, this wasn't happening recently to people going to like with Code Pink on Code Pink trips to Cuba. So.
Yeah. They said in an initial briefing before we went that they'd never had any trouble before, and so I think they didn't expect this to happen.
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah, I've been to Canada also. Yeah.
Katie, because you are one of the people on the delegation who've been to Cuba before, for me as my first time, this was my only exposure, so I wasn't able to compare Cuba under the existing fuel blockade to Cuba before. And of course, a lot of people say, well, the things that you're seeing in Cuba, these are long-standing things. They have nothing to do with the fuel blockade. This is the Cuban economic system. Now, setting aside the fact that the embargo has been in place since the early 60s, could you contrast what you saw this time with what you've seen previously in Cuba?
Yeah, more homeless people and more people asking for money. Not really comparable to in the past. And again, a lot less homeless people than you see in the United States.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that was something that was noticeable. And it just a lot of things that the trash that people have mentioned, the trash, you never saw trash on the street the way you did this time. But I have to say, like, there was a blackout, and which we've mentioned, and I was walking. Nathan, you and I were there. I didn't feel afraid for a second, and not only that, I didn't even notice how I didn't feel afraid until later on. I was like, "Oh wow, if I had been in New York and that had happened."
No, this is a fascinating thing about Cuba that I knew that it was fairly low crime, because they say, you don't have to worry about crime in Cuba. There's not much of it. I knew that, but I noticed because I spent most of my time just walking the streets of Havana. I just wanted to see.
And let's just say Nathan doesn't look exactly. He doesn't pass for Cuban.
No, I don't pass for Cuban. I was wearing a jacket as usual. I looked very much like an American in Cuba, but I walked through the poorest neighborhoods I've ever been in my life, and not for 1 second did I feel remotely unsafe. It was very interesting because I felt so much safer in Havana than in the pitch black than in New Orleans in the light. Because no one has guns, nobody's shooting each other, nobody's fighting, and nobody's. It was remarkable to walk through all these places where I'm a total stranger. I don't speak the language. Right. There's every incentive to rob me because I'm totally on my own with a wallet full of money, of cash in among
dollars,
people, of dollars, which are desperately needed in Cuba, and yet I feel completely safe. I mean, it is a remarkable, and I talked to Cubans about this, and they just go, our culture is not, we don't do what happens in America where you're always fighting and shooting each other,
right?
And it's just true.
And also, again, I don't want to sound like I'm picking on the DR, but Vic, you've traveled there a lot, and I know that
I'll say how many times did you walk? So there was a lot of commerce everywhere. Did you see anybody openly count cash like with wads of cash? And I thought that was funny. I was just like, the guy's got a wad of cash and he's got it wide open in front of everybody and he's just counting it like it's nothing. You can't. Again, I'm from DR. Like, pardon me for my Dominican you can't do that in Dominican Republic. You got to be careful. You got to be on your P's and Q's. You got to watch. So it's it was. And then there was no police.
Oh, so, that's the other thing. I saw, I know Cuba is supposedly a police state. I saw one police officer the entire time I was there. It was stunning. There came a certain point where I was like, hang on a minute, there's something weird about this place. And then I was like, oh, compared to the French Quarter where there are soldiers, literal soldiers walking up and down with assault rifles.
The French Quarter is New Orleans, for people who don't know, who are maybe from other.
And there are cops everywhere, and it's way less safe, even with all those cops around. There are no police.
Right.
I went to New Orleans once, After Katrina, I was terrified. I got arrested by military police because I was with what was the name of the organization? I forgot, but they thought that we were in a stolen car. I got put in handcuffs. It was a whole thing. I mean, luckily we were, I was detained for a little bit. They sorted it out, but they were everywhere. It was just like a police state in New Orleans, and I was terrified. But yeah, in Cuba, I'm like looking around. I'm like, so we're in Havana. This is a tourist place. Like the Cubans need the tourist dollars. You would think that they would need to protect it, but there's no need to protect it because nothing's going on. No one's gonna rob you. There's no violence.
Right.
It's remarkable. It's remarkable.
Wild. I and it took me a while to sort of like realize it and sort of go, wait a second, I've been walking all day, and I have a pretty good sense now, because when you live in a city, I've lived in this city like 7 years, and you develop a pretty good sense for when you're in a bad situation, and you just, you're always kind of looking around. You're always just getting a sense, is this going to go bad? Do I need to find an exit? And I just like that sense just didn't go off once across miles and miles and miles of walking, often in the dark.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. We're supposed to go to a, I don't want to say, I don't want anyone to get hacked, but yeah, we have something else to do, online, but we can be a little late. Any final comments that you guys want to make?
I mean,
and come back whenever you want, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, well, I hope people check out the articles that we did in Current Affairs, because I've done one that was just about my observations there, and a little bit about the history, and then one clearing up the misinformation. Then we got another big print feature. I was there with my colleague Alex Skopik, who's doing a huge feature, like big 20-page feature on Cuba for our next print edition. So if people subscribe, they can get that. It was simultaneously like this incredible experience. I don't travel much, and it was remarkable seeing this place that's resisted the boot of Yankee imperialism for so long, successfully. But seeing what my country is doing to these people was just so aggravating, so infuriating and maddening. And then seeing how it was presented in the US press and realizing what shameless distorters of reality they are. So, it was a very moving experience. It was a very enraging experience. And, and I think everyone has kind of an obligation to familiarize themselves with the history of how the U.S. has treated Cuba, the present situation, and to do what you can to change the politics of this, because we're responsible for their suffering. And if our country changes policy, there was just the news just this afternoon that the U.S. is letting the Russian oil tanker dock in Cuba. So there is... So who knows if that's because there has been such outrage about this deprivation, but the U.S. has actually now relaxed slightly the fuel blockade.
Wow.
I would just say that Cuba. So I've been reading about the Cuban Revolution for 20 plus years. I'm a worker. I don't come from the world of academia. I never went to college.
But you're a big nerd.
I am,
because I've seen your books.
I'm fascinated. I've always been fascinated with Cuba. I've always been in solidarity with Cuba. But to visit for the first time and see for myself, it just confirmed and affirmed everything that I believed. And I just can't. I can't say enough about the resiliency of the Cuban people, and they're a dignified people, a peaceful people, an educated people, a cultured people. I've never met this type of human being before. I'll repeat that again and again. I would encourage folks to go to Cuba. It's a magical place. I thought about this. So can you imagine? So we did what we did, and we had all these wonderful experiences and conversations. And I kind of, sometimes you would overhear conversations. This has been going on since 1959, where it's probably been this intellectual hub, this revolutionary hub where people, socialists and leftists and progressives and all types of people have come to Cuba to smoke cigars, drink a little and conversate and talk about revolution and get romantic about the idea of revolution. It really is a magical place. Someone who used to work for grandma, who works for Radio Havana, and
that's a newspaper. For people who don't know.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. And she used to be a diplomat to Russia. I've become really good friends with her. And she said, I hope you didn't get discouraged by what happened to you on Wednesday. I said, no, I'm always gonna be a revolutionary worker. And she responded by saying, good, you need to continue to come to Cuba to nourish yourself with revolution. Cuba's a good place to learn. And so, for folks who, if you're confused about what Cuba is or it isn't, go to Cuba, visit Cuba, put together a delegation. If you have to go as a tourist, that's fine because they need the tourist dollars. But I really encourage people go, on something like what we did. It doesn't have to be exactly what we did, but put together a delegation and really send, go out there on a mission with an agenda, and nourish yourself with revolution.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I like that a lot. And by the way, I've been to Doha and Istanbul also. I say that because someone was like, go to Cuba, skip Dubai. And yeah, I went to Dubai for hot pot, so I didn't really get to see it a lot. But definitely, Cuba is, everyone should go to Cuba. It's an amazing place to go. And again, I'm not saying this, please do like the stream if you haven't already. If you're watching this later, like it. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe, because we are doing these extra streams. So like we did one tonight. Tomorrow we're going to co-stream with Code Pink, this cool report back with some great guests. And then I have my regular show on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. That's every week. But we do these extra shows. We do them a lot, for instance, to be able to talk to people in Iran, talk to people in Lebanon, people in different time zones. So you just hit subscribe and then the bell. Also, if you can become patrons at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. And some things to look forward to. I had an amazing interview with Jeremy Corbyn. That was so cool. It was right in front of the Simon Bolivar statue. We had to move because of the generator noise that was inside of this other venue right there. I interviewed, I did a really not cute, I don't know what I say. It was on my cell phone, so it wasn't like really great video cameras. And shout out, by the way, to Kate Willett and for putting together a really great media delegation. Was really impressed with all the people who went on that. Shout out to who else? Let's see. I want to just give some shout outs. Another thing that you can look forward to is an interview I did with, this is really cool, with one of the Cuban Five. So those are the guys who were accused of being spies.
Can't wait for that.
What'd you say? I
can't wait for that.
Yeah, this is a really fascinating story. They were basically, they were accused of being spies, but really what they were doing is that they were gathering intelligence on Cuban American terrorists. So that was fascinating. Also, shout out to Jihan, who was doing the production, the video. Really great stuff. She shot the Corbyn interview as well as the Cuban Five interview. And I did something with Ann Wright, the retired colonel who resigned from the State Department over Iraq. So those are going to be coming out. Oh, and I did a little thing with Kneecap. Yeah, the great Irish band, rap group, Irish language hip hop trio. And people have been commenting on I look tired. I do look tired. I will also say I'm on a different device because I don't trust that my devices haven't been compromised. So that may have something to do with it also, but I am tired. Yeah, tired. All right. So
you also got to see your friend Estela Bravo, and her folks who haven't seen Estela Bravo's documentary on Fidel Castro, you should go check that out. It's a very good documentary. You can find it online on YouTube. Yeah,
it is great. Victor, tell Katie to give my contact. I am Cuban 100 said that. So Victor, tell Katie. Okay. I know that is. Anyway, so thank you guys so much. I'll put the links to all of the different orgs. I'll put the links to Current Affairs. Everyone read Current Affairs. It's great. Subscribe. We actually subscribe to the print version. And that is, by the way, if you ever saw some really viral clips of Wallace Shawn talking about Israel and the Nazis, that came from a great interview. I mean, I'm not crediting myself. It was a great interview with him that I did, and then we wrote it up for the for Current Affairs because it made a great read. And so we're going to keep doing that with some of the.
We're going to have your Corbyn thing. We're going to have a transcript of in the in Current Affairs.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's all there is to say. And thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Vic. Thank you, Mo. Thank you, Medea. See you guys tomorrow night at 7 p.m. for that cool Code Pink thing, and then see you on the regular show at 7 p.m. where we're going to be speaking to Cuba-based journalist Ed Augustine about the hospitals in Cuba, and so many more guests. Okay, bye everyone.